right, hello everybody. These are the Mug Authors today, and today we're going to talk about, as a writer, what you should think about, what you should really take into account when thinking about signing on with a new publisher. So that can be anything related from ranging from the actual contract side of things to just what to look for in a publisher more generally. And so both Lewis and Charlotte have some really good experiences in this area, and so I'm going to kind of let them kick off the discussion. Do you want to go first, Charlotte?
I'm gonna take off first.
All right.
I wouldn't say my experiences were really good. I do have experience. I'm not
Yeah,
gonna talk
good in the
about
sense
my.
of learning. You learned a lot from it. That sense, yeah,
Definitely.
yeah.
Um, Make sure that your agent, if you have an agent, does not live in Looney Tunes land. Um, my agent actually did shop my work to vanity publishers because she didn't know any better. I didn't know that at the time, but as for the contract that I got, there was nothing wrong with the contract. It clearly stated when I was going to be published. It was like 18 months out. Um, it said that after 2 years I could get my rights back. It was very clear. I'm telling you all the good things about it. They had a spreadsheet that any of the authors could log into and see the sales for everybody. Very transparent. It's on Google
Wow.
Docs. I mean, you couldn't edit it, but you could look at it. So, there was nothing wrong with the publisher except that they published romance novels and mysteries, which makes sense. That's the most popular thing that people read. And this was 2012. Actually, I think it was 2010 because I republished my novel. It came out in 2012. So, at any rate, um, they didn't publish fantasy. And here I have written this fantasy novel and fairy tale retelling, which is so outside of their range. So the editor that I got did not understand. I guess they figured if it has a fairy godmother in it, it's a children's book. And she says, "Oh, you got to cut 20% of this." So I did. I took out an entire subplot because it was 100,000 words. And then that person got sick or something happened in their family. I got a different editor. After I wrote to them and said, this book's coming out in 6 months. I mean, don't we need to do some editing? And so I got somebody else, and she helped me put the stuff back in, and it really did work out okay. Um, but the book didn't sell because they didn't have that audience. So when it became clear to me that it wasn't going to sell, I didn't know anything about promoting books. I mean, I went to a few book signings, and I don't think there even was a Facebook then. I mean, I mean, it's 2012. you
Yep.
know, the world is a different place now.
I
But
think
I didn't know
everybody was on
anything
MySpace at that point.
yeah, MySpace. I remember having a MySpace account,
Mm-hmm.
which some of my students turned me on to. I was still teaching English back then. And it didn't go anywhere. So I got my rights back, and I thought, well, at least I can publish it like I want to. And that was about the time that Amazon made it was very easy to publish on Amazon. I mean, if you can read, you can publish. And I'd used the same cover. I wrote to the artist and asked her if it was okay if I used that cover. In fact, when I wrote the next book, um, I asked her to make me another cover, and she did. I paid her, of course, but um, so I just republished it, and I haven't looked back. I haven't made any money on it with the company. I didn't make any money on it on Amazon, but at least, except, I sell a book now and then. I carry them around the back of my car and sell one now and then. My
Didn't you
license
say?
tags. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, didn't you say that also that publisher published like 2 books a week? So you kind of
Yes.
had some question as to how successfully, effectively they could be promoting if they're publishing at that rate, I guess.
And at
Right.
that rate, if they sold one book by one author a week and they've got 500 authors, they've got money coming in.
Hmm.
If
Enough
the
money they
author
should be
makes a
paying you
dollar,
in advance, definitely.
oh no, there's no advance. No,
Yeah, I
absolutely not.
see. Mm.
Uh, and I got the impression they were like maybe 2 or 3 people that ran the company, and maybe some of the authors swapped out editing for publication or something. I don't know that for sure. I just got the impression that this was a dining room
Mhm.
operation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I do know some other people that publish books, and apparently, and they're out. Uh, I can mention John Hartness, for example, and Falstaff Books in Charlotte. They turn out a good number of books, but they shop them everywhere. I mean, I've seen the ads. I've seen, where they go to cons. I've seen all that stuff. It's very visible. So, at any rate, I decided that rather than having somebody else do the stuff that I do know how to do, and I do have some training in art, so I can make uh, a decent cover, and I understand Photoshop, and I can do layout, and I've worked as an ad designer and several other things like that. I was a web designer for a while, so I've got some skills along those lines. And somebody who doesn't have any of that, they would need to do something else. But for me, it makes sense for me to publish my own stuff.
Hmm.
Yep.
So, so Lewis, tell us your story of woe. Just kidding.
I have much woe to
dispense.
impart. Yeah. No, I mean, I want to start by saying that, and I know Charlotte wasn't implying this, but I want to put out there that dining room table publications are not necessarily bad. I've worked with dozens of small press magazines and small press publishers who are just do fabulous stuff, and it's usually a two-person, a 1 or 2 person team, like a husband and wife, for example. Um, and they put out really nice things. They also only publish like about 4 or 5 titles a year. They're not putting out 2 titles a week. Yeah, I would be nervous about the quality, the caliber of my editing staff if they're putting out books that fast. Oh, Gail's back. Oh boy,
Awesome.
Gail
Hey,
can
Gail, what's up?
really, like, no pun intended. She can regale us with lots of publishing stuff.
Are we
Gail,
doing horror
Yeah,
stories about publishing?
well,
we're
yeah,
yeah.
it's kind of devolving into horror stories. We're supposed to be talking about contracts, but you know,
Well, and what to look for in a publisher or to avoid in a publisher, that sort of thing. And of course,
Mhm.
this is an official recording, so don't feel like you have to name any names, but yeah, that's kind of what we're doing.
Okay, excellent, excellent.
Or create pseudonyms to protect the innocent. That's just as much.
yeah, we don't want to be sued over the truth.
So yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Charlotte had just finished kind of sharing some of her experiences, and yeah, so we were just gonna go whoever wants to go next.
Okay. With small presses or publishing houses, is that what we're discussing?
Just
yeah.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, because I've been involved with a bunch of them since I first started writing in the late 90s, and of varying degrees of integrity, shall we say? And,
That is a very kind way to put it. The moral flexibility, I think, would be nice. Yeah.
Moral variation.
Mm-hmm.
it was interesting. The one that Lewis and I and Charlotte briefly were involved in back in the around 2000, 2001. There were certainly some issues there, but
Oh man, yeah. Forgot about that one.
that
I've
one,
forgotten about that.
yeah,
Wow.
that was interesting.
So
Literally, the publisher ended up, one of her authors was trying to seek the FBI on her. That's how bad it was.
And some of their
What?
stuff ended up being the publisher for Amazon's print on demand. She was involved with that. That she sold the company to Amazon.
Mhm.
I remember that.
Oh my
I
gosh.
worked on their web
Yep.
design and some of the back covers of the print books. I didn't do any writing for them.
Mhm.
Let me make sure I heard that right. So you said this publisher tried to get the FBI to go after Charlotte?
No,
Or,
No.
publisher.
One of the authors tried to get
oh,
to go after the
okay.
publisher because
I
she
misheard that.
was
Okay,
basically screwing over all the authors.
got it. That makes sense.
My
And
goodness.
own the print on demand company. That was a company down in Charleston, the one that Amazon ended up buying for their own print on demand, because that's what we use for our print books.
That's why a lot of their stuff says printed in Charleston. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I don't know how many other
Wow.
branches they have, but yeah, that was originally a standalone company down in Charleston that was just cranked up purely for print on demand, and
Interesting.
Amazon
Well,
bought it. So
look at that. We are a part of publishing history.
History.
And inadvertently, man, wow.
fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
I remember, well, mostly what I remember about that experience is creating a mountain of content and having it stolen and
Yeah.
used,
And use.
and seeing my content in another author's books for like, what, 4 or 5 years, one book after another. And it's like, wow.
Mhm.
And I was working in a bookstore, and the books were on the shelves. And people would come in and like, have you read her? And I'm like, nope. No, I have not.
Keep it professional.
Yeah. It's just, Well, she's just great. And I'm like, oh, really? What parts do you like? You know, trying to see if it was mine. Yeah. So that was fun.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It's fun. Fun is okay.
Yeah.
Well,
When
have
you're in
fun.
when you're just playing around in the business and you're not really I hate to use the term serious, but when you don't know what you're doing, then those experiences can be fun. But when you really start treating this seriously, you want to stay away from contracts that they're gonna screw you over. We were talking earlier. What is that clause in a contract where if your sales dip below a certain number or percentage, you have the option to pull the title? You know what that clause is called?
I do not, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So when Gail and I were on a project one time, we ended up with a contract that didn't give us that clause, and I was so excited about getting a contract at that point that I didn't read very effectively, and it wasn't there, and we were stuck with being with this publisher for, my gosh, 3-4 years.
Yeah,
Probably.
about that.
Yeah.
Get
And-
our right back.
And we were trying, we wanted our rights, and we couldn't get them back for whatever reason. And finally we got it back. And I know Gail's done something with hers, but I've been very slow to do mine. But I mean, yeah, that's a whole novel. I could just I could touch up and republish if I wanted to. And I'm probably going to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're ruthless. Yeah, you probably started working on it immediately. Yeah.
I did.
And just going back to the contracts thing, something else we were talking about earlier is, if you have an option and there's ambiguous language in there, always make it something more concrete. And just a, simple example of that is like, if the contract says your rights will revert back to you from the publisher within a reasonable time, I would say don't do that, because reasonable time to who? Like, what's reasonable? That's pretty wishy-washy. So I'd much rather say within 6 months, within 180 days, or something that's actually concrete. As a writer, I'd be much more comfortable with that.
And you also want to keep an eye out for the length of time they say that it takes before your rights revert back to you. This is more in magazine publishing than anything. I have seen contracts where they want to hold on to your short story for 3 years.
Yep.
Jeez.
And I'm like, I'm not even going to be alive in 3 years. What are you talking about? This is ridiculous. Do you know how old I am? And anyway, so it's like, man, it's like you haven't seen my blood sugar numbers lately. I'm not 3 years.
You got to share the two. Let's. So for everyone watching this, what are the two scariest words in a contract? You said them earlier.
Oh, in perpetuity.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
You run for the hills if you see in perpetuity. Oh my gosh, man, you find where they are and set their building on fire. In perpetuity means that they've got you forever. And a lot of, and Gail knows what I'm talking about, a lot of those old school science fiction authors just got killed on those in perpetuity contracts back in the day, back in the 50s, 60s,
Yes.
stuff like that. Yeah, that's the biggest poison pill in contracts. And I want to also point out that if you are dealing with any kind of contract situation, or if you're looking at a publisher as a possible thing, I would go to Predators and Editors. It's a website
Yeah.
that that's what they do. They research publishers, and they look for the what's referred to as a predatory contract.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
they're an independent organization, and they're doing what groups like SIFWA should be doing, and what SIFWA sometimes claims they do. But SIFWA doesn't go after big publishers proper.
Mhm.
They
So
they're
just to clarify, because Predators and Editors has been around for a while, that
Oh,
that
yeah.
is still actively updated though, right? They're still very active then.
I guess I've been indie for about 5 or 6 years now, so I haven't been paying it. I'm not really paying attention to anything in the traditional markets nowadays. So
Yeah.
they could very well. So yeah, look them up.
Yeah.
Um, and if nothing else, they may have information on your publisher from back in the day. That's not to say that publishers won't amend their contracts. Sometimes,
Mhm.
Yeah.
here we go, John. It's a segue. Um,
Yes.
Sometimes publishers unintentionally create some language that looks a little sketchy, and we ran into something like that, did we not?
Mhm.
Just recently.
Just recently.
Very recently.
Does anyone wish to share that without mentioning the publisher's name?
Yeah. So without mentioning any particular name, so one of the four of us recently got a contract, and the there was a clause in there basically saying that all intellectual property created by the client and related materials would be the sole property of the client, and that the reason that sort of threw up a red flag is in this sense of the contract, client meant not the writer, as you might
Right.
think, like
Mhm.
that's what you would think,
I thought immediately the
but
client
it
was the
meant the
writer.
publisher. Yeah, the client. So
Yeah.
usually, which is kind of just a little kind of an odd wording, and so we kind of so the person in our group who was working with this publisher kind of went back to them and said, look, we need to talk about what this language means and update it, which my understanding is the publisher though was very reasonable and open to working with them. So it all turned out well, but all of that is to say, like, we there's this kind of a plain, if several people read the same sentence and all come away confused, that's a pretty good sign, okay, that maybe you should talk to the publisher. And that's
Right.
another thing is, this sounds like a simple thing, but a lot of writers, I think it's because they get so excited they have a contract and they don't want to think critically. But a lot of times, if you're going to sign with the publisher, just show your contract to a couple other people. Make sure you got more than one set of eyes looking at it, and that can be really helpful too.
And don't be afraid to voice something to the publisher. Here is the
Exactly.
real reason why a lot of people end up in these things. Even the ones that read them, they will see these certain things that they're not cool about, and they'll let it happen anyway because they just want to get published.
Mhm.
And when you have a predatory company, that's what they're banking on. They're banking on you being too scared to say anything. And so, but you should always speak up. And
Well,
if you have to, retain legal counsel for that, because this is a contract. This is a binding document. And tell them the word in the contract that threw up the red flag for you, John.
well, actually, it was technically the positioning of the word "and."
And
Just
a
that's
conjunction. And it sounded like they had the "and" was "and all related materials," which sounds like they owned. That's the part where it sounded like they owned the manuscript itself
Mhm. Yeah.
permanently.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was the part that had to be resolved, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, and this doesn't really, and what's interesting is the same concept though about being careful as a writer about what's in the contract. I mean, that does apply to as an indie published author too.
Yes, it does.
You have like a platform like Web Novel, which my understanding is they own your intellectual property when you publish through them. It's been a few years. It's been a year or so since I last looked at them. But when I last checked, it seems like that was the contractual situation. So it's like
That was the impression I got by the agreement,
Yeah.
and there were a lot of people saying you should go with them, and I'm like, I'm not doing that.
Uh-huh.
yeah,
You're out of
I
your
mean,
mind.
so and it's really interesting because since then I've noticed web novel. There was a series on, I think, Netflix. It was a foreign series that came from a book, from a story from web novel. So you just know. I remember thinking to myself, here this author's story has blown up and become hugely successful and is now an actual show on Netflix. And I'm sure that author is receiving almost nothing, pennies on the dollar, if anything, maybe
Yeah,
nothing
if anything.
from their
Exactly.
work.
If
And
anything.
so it's like, do your
Yeah.
due diligence and don't let yourself be taken advantage of. There's no, you know, think of yourself, have a little thought for your, in other words, you have value as a writer. Don't
Yeah.
count that short.
And it's hard to feel like you have value because everybody thinks writers are, well, the public thinks we're all rich, and then the
Also, the
production
key.
people
Yeah.
think we're all a bunch of maniacs or rubes or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's hard. But society is constantly devaluing us.
Yeah.
um, we're the
Dude,
people that kept everyone sane during the pandemic with stories and all of that, but
yeah.
we're garbage, right? So then that's the idea, and but you have to be able to generate that from within. You can't let other people tell you. So yes, you have to know your own value. You have to
Yeah.
be more confident and go after the things when you are being wronged. You have to stand up for yourself. If you don't, that makes it tougher for all of us.
Yeah.
It just does.
Yeah, it's definitely a like that's why, yeah, it's a collective thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it
And
is. Yeah, that's why I'm so into the Vela community, because it's a community of authors, and
yeah,
we have to look out for one another. We have to protect each other.
it's a great point.
Definitely. Hmm.
All right, this video got longer than I expected. I know that never happens, right? Um, all right, so there we go. We're gonna wrap this up. But yeah, so that's
Boy.
sort of our just some general commentary about what to look for in a publisher and how to avoid missteps in contracts.